So today we're going to do something a little different. I am going to actually cut up an old quilt. Now, I am not taking this lightly. I know that quilts really, or at least I feel quilts should stay as quilts, and if you can repair them, that you should. However, this quilt, which is the mouse-eaten quilt that I featured back in February, is not one that I believe can be saved. There's a lot of damage, a lot of, let's say, critter residue that was left in this quilt when a family decided to take up house in this quilt. And when I really started looking at the pieces that I would need to repair, I realized there was a lot of mildew and just gross stuff in this quilt. So I decided to take the parts that I could and make it into these stockings. And this, like I said, wasn't something I took lightly, but I felt like this would be something that would honor my grandmother and it would be an heirloom for years to come. But before we get started on the tutorial, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, I do have a supply list. Just keep in mind that the supply list is what I used, but depending on your circumstances and the type of quilt you're using, you might have to adjust that some. Also, because this is such a long video, I did put timestamps below and you'll be able to click on the part that you want to see. So let's get started. Okay, so we have our old quilt and we have the pattern. So the pattern I got from Learn, Create, Sew. I just downloaded it. I found it on Pinterest. There are tons of patterns out there that are free that you can use. And I think for this one you needed to subscribe to her newsletter or her blog. I'm not sure. This is a size large. I think she had a bunch of other sizes. She also had a cuff on hers, and I am just turning down that cuff because I'm not going to use it for this project. So I'm altering it a little bit, but that is where I got the pattern. You can find other patterns online. There's tons of free ones. So I'm going to just take my pattern and place it on this quilt somewhere where there's not a lot of damage. And I'm just going to keep looking for any damage that I see. I think we're in pretty good shape here. And I'm going to just place something heavy. I'm just going to use rolls of tape on it. And I'm going to loosely cut around this. And the reason I'm not cutting this pattern out directly is because I am going to quilt this quilt. I'm going to take the ties out and actually quilt it with some quilt lines. I'm also going to leave the ties in while I quilt it to hold it all together, almost like a basting, okay? So I'm going to loosely cut around this right now. Okay, and I'm going to do that a second time, but I'm going to flip the pattern over when I do it because we want a right and a left, okay? So I'm going to find another spot and cut another piece out just like that. All right, so I have two pieces going in opposite directions, so I have a front and a back. And the reason that I decided to do it this way and make the pieces a little bit oversized is because it is a little bit wonky. It is a very scrappy quilt. We have pieces that are pieced together. And because I want to quilt this, I know these are going to shift and stretch a little bit, and I want to make sure that I have enough space to allow the fabric to do that. And that's just because it's an old quilt. And you might not have to do this step. If you have a quilt that is heavily quilted, you wouldn't need to go back in and re-quilt it, but you might need to repair it or something like that. It just gives me a little bit of safe space to do what I need to do for this particular quilt. So I'm going to go to the machine. I'm going to quilt this. I'm just going to do a diagonal stitch across and this way and this way. Then we'll take those pieces to cut out our actual pattern, and I'll show you some tricks on how to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to quilt, and as I come up onto these ties, I'm just going to clip them off at that point. So here we go. And I'm just eyeballing it. I'm not marking it because honestly, this quilt isn't super straight, so I don't want to highlight the fact that it's not super straight. I'd want to kind of hide it. So I'm just going to go corner to corner as I quilt. I'm going to set these aside, these quilted panels, and then I'm going to take a piece of freezer paper. Now this freezer paper is 18 inches long, which works out perfectly for the size, and I'm just going to fold it in half. So it's one sheet, it's about 24 inches long. I'm folding it in half with the wax side facing each other, okay? And then I'm going to take my template, and I'm just going to draw around this and then cut this out. And then I'm going to have two pieces like this that are opposites. Okay, and so the wax side is on this side and the wax side is on this side. And this is what we're going to be placing on our panels that we pre-quilted. So I'm not going to show cutting this out. That's pretty self-explanatory, so I'll set this aside. What's nice about using wax paper is it allows you to have a good template that's going to stay on the actual stocking or whatever you're making. You can also use this with applique. It works really, really well, and it works beautifully for using it with old quilts. So I'm going to place this on here, and I'm just going to take an iron and iron this down. Now I've used these already once before when I made my demo and when I was trying this pattern. But what I like about using the wax paper is I can see through it, so I can line things up, and it's reusable. So I can keep using this probably like 3 or 4 times before I have to discard it. And I just love that. So I'm going to iron this on, and then I'm going to cut out on that edge all the way around. I'm going to do that to both pieces. Okay, so these are cut out, and you can see they're opposites, like I've said, and these just peel right off, and you have your stocking pieces, just like that. All right, and you can even reuse them. So these are my scraps. I know somebody will probably say something about wastefulness. I will be putting these in the dog beds. And before I do that, I'll make sure that I can harvest whatever I can for English paper piecing or other small projects. So I'm not going to just throw this out. It will go to some sort of reuse. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. And next we are going to cut our lining. So we're just going to take 2 pieces of fabric and put it right sides together. And I'm just going to use the same template that I used to make my patterns, because why not? I'm going to just adhere this and cut this out too, so I have my lining pieces ready to go. And I'm just going to take my iron and adhere it just like that. That way I can cut it out and it will be the same. Now I don't have to worry about the layers or the thickness, and I can just take scissors or even my rotary cutter and cut this out. Okay, so next we're going to add the lace to the top, and I'll show you how to do that. So if you remember, there was lace around the outside of the quilt, so I do want to put that at the top. So I cut a piece off, and I want to make sure it's right sides up, and I'm just going to place it on here with the wrong side facing the right side of the top. I'm going to stitch across the top of that, and I'm going to do the same on the other one. And that's going to give us a pretty lace trim on top. It'll make it very pretty. So I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to make my hanger at the same time. So this is just a scrap piece of the quilt. It's just the quilt top. I took the backing off and the batting, and I'm going to fold this in half, and I'm going to stitch down this seam here. So it's folded in half, right sides together. I'm going to just stitch along the seam and then turn it. Okay, these are stitched on, and it's just a very small seam allowance on that because I'm just tacking it down. It will be enclosed when we finish the actual stocking. So I'm going to set those aside, and I did also sew a seam down this. Now, it is wonky because it isn't a very stable quilt, and also there's a lot of bias edges and stuff, so it's a little tricky to do that. But don't worry about that. If you have that problem, it's not an issue. No one's ever going to notice. So I'm just going to put a pin on the inside there, like that, and I'm just going to feed this through to turn it. This is a great tip for turning anything like this. And just tug on that, and when you get it all the way through, it gets really easy to do because you can just work it through the other side. So there's the end of my pin, and I'm just going to very carefully, because like I said, the fabric's fragile. I'm just going to press this really well and decide what I want to have showing. And I think I'm going to just press it like that. Okay, so if you don't want to do this step, you can use like ribbon or something, or even a hook, like a plastic ring or something as your hanger. And what I'm going to do next is just tack this down so it won't fall apart when I'm putting it together into the stocking. So I have a few choices. You can do something like this to have it hang, but I'm just going to do it just in half, like that. And put the hanger on like that. So I'm going to stitch just right here to keep that together, and I will be right back. All right, so what do we have? We have our front or back, depending, and our back, and they're opposites, as you can see. And we also have our linings that are also opposites. So for the next step, we're going to sew and construct this. We're going to start with the lining. All right, so the lining is right sides together. Okay, and we're going to leave an opening. And because this is an antique quilt, I want to leave a decent size opening because I don't want to stretch this or pull it too much as I'm pulling it through. You don't need as big of an opening if you're just using regular fabric or if you're using a newer quilt. So to remind myself, I am going to just mark it here, a nice big opening somewhere like that. And you know what? You guys can't see that probably, so I'm going to use a different pen so you can see it. So this is just going to remind me that I need that, leave that opening. So for the lining, I'm going to stitch from here to here, back stitch, and then start here, back stitch, and go all the way around, leaving the top open. Do not stitch this top. We're not stitching that yet. So we're going to go around the outside using, for this, I'm actually just going to use the side of my presser foot for my walking foot. I'll put on the screen what size that is. I'm not quite sure. I know it's bigger than a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to put that aside because I'm going to sew these at the same time. So here are my pieces for my actual stocking, which I'm loving how it's turning out. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have our hook attached. Okay, so what we're going to do is take whichever side we think is the front, which I don't know, how's it hang? Hangs like this, right? I think. Okay, and I'm going to measure, I'm going to cut some threads here so I don't have to do it later. I'm going to measure about, and I'm just going to use my mat here, and eyeball about an inch or so down. And I am going to clip that in place on top of the lace, okay? And that is going to, you could sew this, you could tack this down so it doesn't move, but I don't think you necessarily need to, unless you're kind of new to sewing, maybe you should. So then I'm going to take the other side and I'm going to do right sides together and I'm going to line up the stocking. Now I want to make sure that my lace is flat, or whatever trim I have is flat. Now you can see it hangs over. I didn't trim it real well. I'll trim that after, that's no big deal. And I'm going to line this up. And then I'm going to clip all of the edges around. And when I sew this, I'm going to start here, I'm going to back stitch and go all the way around and back stitch here. I am not sewing this top. Do not sew this top. And I'm going to make sure that I do some extra stitches over that hook because we don't want that coming out. Again, I'm going to use the side of my presser foot, and I'll again put the size up on the screen, but you just want to leave a little bit more of a seam allowance so you can trim, so you can cut those curves. And because it is an old quilt, you want to make sure it's secure and all the pieces made it. So I'm just going to clip all the way around and sew. Okay, so these are sewn together. And before I do anything else, I am going to first get this on camera here. Okay, there we go. And first I'm going to turn this to make sure that all the pieces on the front are in those seams, because trust me, I know that I've already made that mistake where I started trimming this and preparing it for the next step and I didn't get every piece. So I'm going to just turn it around just to check. Oh, it turned out so cute. I love it. And it looks like I did pretty good. Just checking everything, and I think I got it all. Okay, so I'm going to turn this back around. Now I don't have to do that with the lining, of course, because there's no patchwork on the front or inside or whatever. Here, I'm all twisted and turned around. So the next step that we're going to do is actually trim this down. And I know somebody's going to mention that this would be really cool as a lining, and yes, it absolutely would be, but I really wanted 2 layers to add to the stability of this. And also, I don't know, I just like knowing there's a secret inside too that I know about, and maybe my family knows about, but others might. So it's a nice little surprise if it ever gets a tear or something like that. So next I'm going to trim down the seam allowances some, and that's just going to reduce the bulk. but I don't want to go too far that it's going to stress some of the seams. So you have to kind of have a balancing act there. I'm also going to clip my corners and my curves so it lays nice and flat, and then we'll press it. And we'll do the same with this one and move on to the next step. Okay, so these are trimmed down, and I did clip, you can see the curves. I just put little snips here, I'll show you. I just put a little snip in there. And do not cut through that seam, of course, but you're just gonna put little snips. And that's gonna allow that fabric to ease around. Especially important here. I noticed that sometimes it gets kind of weird in the concaves curves versus the convex. Hopefully I got that right. All right, so the next step is to get this into this. So to do that, we're going to turn one of these right side out, and I like to do the lining. So I'm just going to turn this so it's the right side out. Okay, and then I'm going to give it a good press and make sure everything's lying flat and all that wonderful stuff. You will have a chance to press it again afterward. Actually, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to press it afterward because it's going to get crinkled anyway when I turn it. So I'm going to place this inside this. Okay, so this is my right side in here. I'm going to make sure my right sides are together. So I'm going to put my whole hand into the stocking, and I'm going to put this in here like this. I'm going to grab that toe at the end and just make sure the heel's in the right place, everything's in the right place, and pull my hand out. You can see right sides are together. So that's the quilt top or the stocking front and back, and this is the front of the fabric. And I'm going to line them up. This takes a little finagling, and you want to make sure you get it right because it really does make a difference. This is an important step. And I'm going to first line up this seam, and I'm going to clip it or pin it, doesn't matter. I like clips because of the bulk. I'll open that seam if I can. I'm not going to be able to, I cut it a little too short. All right, but I'm going to line that up, clip it, and then I'm going to go to this side with the other seam. This one's not trimmed as short, so we're as skinny. So I can open that up, open this one up, and I'm going to clip that. And I'm going to work my way around so this lining is lined up to the top of this stocking. Okay, you're going to make sure that's all lined up. Now, I am going to use a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch again for this because I kind of want to have a heavier lip here when we turn it, and when we top stitch it's going to give it a little bit more stability at the top. So I'm just going to stitch all the way around using probably like 5/8 of an inch all the way around that, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, I sewed the top, so now's the fun part. We are going to pull this lining out like this. Okay. We're going to find that hole we left, right? And if you forgot to leave the hole, you can just use your seam ripper and open it up. Don't worry about that. I'm going to put my hand in here, and I'm going to reach down to the toe of the stocking and start pulling it through. Now I am being extra gentle because this is an old quilt, and I don't want to tug too much. I'm also going to turn that lining, right sides out, and now you'll have something that looks like this. Okay. Next, you're going to press all of these wonderful seams and make sure they're nice and crisp. And we're almost done. Okay, so this is completely pressed and nice and neat, and now is the fun part. I also just want to point out, I don't even know where the hole is. Here's the hole. I just pressed in those seams, and then what you do is just top stitch this with matching thread, or even hand stitch this closed. I don't like to do this till the very end, just because in case there's a problem, then I'm not opening up seams to fix it. So, but you do want to fix it because any goodies that you put into this stocking could fall into that hole, right? So I'm just going to stuff that in. So I'll show you that again. I just took this lining and I'm stuffing it in the top here. And I'm going to make sure that the toes are where the toes should be, and the heels are where the heel is where the heel should be. And I'm going to press this really well. I'm going to be careful because I believe this is a synthetic lace, so I don't want to melt it. That would be bad. Actually, I don't even know if I'm going to use an iron on it because of that. So just, you know, use common sense with this and what you have. Make sure that you think of these things. I am going to put some clips around it, and I'm going to just stick them right on the edge of the clip so it holds it nice and tight as I sew. And I'm going to top stitch around this. And I'm going to use an ecru thread because I really don't want it showing up. Okay, so to top stitch this, I am going to run it along this edge. And the thing is, I want to make sure that the top looks really nice. So I'm going to fold it like this. So I'm folding the back in a little bit so I can run right along that. Now, if I had an arm or my old machine that I could put this over the arm of the machine, it would help, but I don't have that set up. And anyway, so I'm just going to go in here and very carefully stitch around. And I am using matching thread, and I am making sure the back is out of the way. So here we go. And I'm just going to stitch around. And then when you get to where you meet the seam, you just, you can backstitch or even shorten your stitch length just to secure it, cut all of your threads. And you can see, you can hardly see that because of the matching thread. That holds the lining and everything together. So that's it. I do have to sew that hole shut, which I'll do now. I'll come out and just put these together and stitch that on the machine. I'll just run a stitch, very short stitch length, so that does not come apart, and you'll never know it's there. I'll do that right now and show you. Here. Get that flat so it lays flat, and I'm just going to go in here, line those up. Probably should use matching thread, but I'm not going to. And I'm going to stitch right on that edge with a very small stitch. Just like that. And then you kind of just go off the edge a little bit. And that's it. That hole is closed. The thread doesn't seem to be showing too much. Clip your threads. Give it another press and put this inside. And there you have it. A wonderful stocking with a hanger made from an old quilt. So my grandmother passed away some time ago, and I think this is just a great way to honor her and to keep her memory alive, especially during the holidays, which she loved the holidays, and it's just a wonderful tribute, in my opinion, to her. So I did make one with lace and one without. I'm going to continue making these until I can make as many as I can out of the quilt that I have. And after that, I'm going to go on to smaller projects. I do want to save as much of this quilt as I possibly can. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm pretty much on most of the social media sites. You can email me, message me, or even put a comment below, and I will do my best to answer your questions that you may have. I'll see you soon. Bye.